And again, this is not cracking. We're not going to bypass any controls. All the information that's recovered is publicly available. It's not password protected. It's we're not going behind the curtain. We're not breaking any interfaces or bypassing any authorization on any sites. Another thing to keep in mind with this kind of work, if you do any of this work yourself, is be a good netizen. There are performance concerns for the sites that you might be reclaiming data from, and you want to make sure that you don't overload your target and that you don't become a nuisance. Social networking sites in general, you've all heard of some of the big ones. They're well known: MySpace, Friendster, Bebo, Facebook. And they vary as to the ease of recovering information. MySpace, the structure is pretty well laid out. It's pretty clear how to navigate a person's profile and recover data. But the HTML on those profiles can be messy. But that's a lot of the appeal of MySpace, is because they give users a lot of flexibility in terms of how they make their profile. So it's a trade-off. A site like Facebook tends to be much more constrained in what they let their users do. On the other hand, that may make the HTML easier to work with when you recover it. But on Facebook, if you're not a friend, you don't see anything. Well, if you're an investigator, you're probably not, a known friend of the profiles you're looking at, so you're going to have trouble recovering content. Just a feel for size. These numbers would not be the official numbers from the sites, but by looking at profile numbers that Google could recover, at least apples to apples, right? So Google recently said there are about 93 million MySpace profiles. Friendster's 1 million, Bebo's 7.5 million. This gives you just a feel for the relative size of these sites. We have some MySpace folks in the room today. The last number I had heard in the press was about 180 million profiles. So you could see that a search engine like Google may not be able to know every profile that's out there when you go look. But at least this gives you a feel for relative size. What kind of stuff are you going to recover? Well, as most of you know, social networking sites are fabulously popular. And you're going to see friends of profile owners. You're going to see their interests. You're going to see contact information. You may see historical information like schools they went to, jobs they had, people they knew, vacations they went on, these kinds of things. You're likely to see pictures, videos, information about group activities that they participate in, this kind of thing, and more. But you got to keep in mind that the quality of the information is often suspect. The information is frequently, it's unstructured, it's a little bit random, and it can also be outdated or inaccurate or patently false. So, drawing conclusions from some of this data can be pretty tricky based on the fact that there isn't a strong identity model with these sites, and so do you really know what you're looking at? To really get into the more of the details of actually recovering information from these sites, the most important thing you have to know is for the particular site that you're doing mining on, the site structure is absolutely critical. How the pages are linked together for a particular profile is really going to determine your methodology of going in and getting data, and how it's linked and how much you can get. So typically, a profile is going to contain a front page or the profile page. Then it's going to have a blog page or pages. It's going to have picture pages. It's going to have comment pages. Typically on the profile, a teaser, if you will, of all of those components will be shown on the profile page. But then usually there's more content behind that profile page. And knowing how for a particular site you navigate those linked pages is going to be critical to spidering that profile. So the basic approach, starting on the left-hand side, moving to the right, first you've got to decide which profiles you're looking for. There's that's sort of an exercise for the reader, if you will. You may be determining the set of profiles you want based on common geographic location, common school membership, common activity, or contact tracing from a particular profile that's the central point of interest. Whatever that pattern is, you've got to come up with the list of profiles that you're going to recover first. That's sort of an input into the hopper, if you will. Then the next stage is the scraping process. You're going to spider the profile. You're going to store the pages. The third phase after that is a recovery phase, which means looking through the stored pages for the types of content that you happen to be looking for. Links to photos, raw text that you could use a natural language processor on, specific details that you go after to recover, like geographic location or school affiliation or whatever it is that you're using as your primary link across profiles. And then finally you get to the analyzing phase. And that's where you're going to try to extract information from data, right? Data mining is only of a particular interest until you get to the point where you want to interpret what you're pulling back. The analyzing phase is the hardest phase. It's also going to be driven by whatever your particular interest in investigation is, and that's, you're going to have to let that be driven by your own priorities and where you're taking the information. Just a little feel to give you a sense of what you might find when you recover profile information. I ran the particular engine I'd put together for some work I was doing, and first time I ran the engine, I got 774 profiles, 750 meg of recovered data, 140,000 comments. When you think about 140,000 comments on 700 profiles, that's a pretty high comment rate. Depending, I was looking at a student population here, and I was left wondering how much studying is going on versus how much social networking site time is going on. Second time I ran the engine, 698 profiles, 953 meg recovered, 145,000 comments. As you can see, for a relatively small number of profiles, you're going to haul back a lot of information. And that's going to be a lot of stuff to pick through. And trust me, there's going to be a lot of chaff and not much wheat, but that's par for the course in this area. One of the activities that I support with this kind of work is investigations. So when I put this section in just to help people understand some of the ins and outs of working with what comes back. So you got to remember that, especially if you're doing an investigation where it may lead to legal proceedings or something like that, that profiles are dynamic. I've seen profiles that change every single day. So if there's critical information to an investigation you're going to do, you've got to maintain chain of custody, you've got to store the information, and you've got to be able to say when and where you got it, because you can't necessarily go back to the profile even the next day and find that key piece of information that's critical to your investigation. Another aspect of this is that the profile recovery is really only the start. Profiles are highly linked to things like Photo Bucket, photo albums, YouTube, you name it. And oftentimes, it's where that path leads that is the critical information that you're looking for. So just, remember, it's the web. It's linked, so follow the links. Also, there's truckloads of information. You saw that with the little factoid slide about how much data comes back in this kind of activity. You're always going to haul back a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily have value to the investigation you're on. You're going to have to pick through it. You got to get good at honing your searches and got to get good at picking out the key attributes that you think are important for what you're looking for, or you'll drown in what you haul back. For searching, particularly when you're trying to make that key list of profiles to begin the process, you want to make sure that you check search engine caches. There can, like I said, with dynamic profiles, the fact that the profile can change so frequently may mean that a search engine has another version of the profile you're looking at than what's currently on the page. That may have some key information for you. And also, different search engines may have different results, and the search engine of the social networking site you're investigating may have different results than any of the other commercial search engines, because if you just think about it for a moment, the search engine of a social networking site has access to the back-end database, and the other search engines don't. So right there's an inherent advantage in terms of content and searching, because if you're using the searching engine on the site itself, they can reach right into the back end, and none of the other search engines can. When you're doing content recovery and when you're doing an investigation, one of the things you've got to ask yourself is, do I want to sign in? It's definitely true that almost without exception, you can see more if you sign in than if you're an anonymous user. On the other hand, you've got to ask yourself if the act of signing in is actually counterproductive to your investigation, because it may show, you may tip off the profile that you're looking at. There's tools for tracing, who visited my profile, this kind of thing. You may lose your anonymity as an investigator. You've got to maintain an ID and a password. You've got to ask yourself things about terms of service again. And then you've also got to ask yourself, does this have any impact on evidentiary issues and your investigation? But in general, you'll find that the quality of what you pull back and the volume of what you pull back will greatly increase if you do sign in. Note, this is not the same thing as being, for lack of a better term, a friend of the profile that you're looking at. It's still the case that even if you're not associated with the profile you're looking at, that you can pull back a lot more stuff if you're signed into the site. A lot of times you'll want to alternate between content that's pulled back and the actual profile itself. So when you're looking at profiles, one thing you'll find, particularly on the social networking sites that permit a lot of diversity in the HTML, is that sometimes the sites are very hard to read. The profile's hard to view. I'm not going to take much of our time here explaining these, but exercise for the reader. I've got a couple of tips here for how to view a profile that's hard to view in the browser. So I encourage you to look at those if you're doing any of this work on your own, to make some of those hard-to-read profiles easier to read again. Pictures. One of the most important artifacts you'll find on profiles is pictures. A key thing to remember is that frequently, but not always, pictures are associated with an album, and the album might be public, might not be password protected. So studying the HTML can give you a link to an album. You may be looking at 6 photos on the profile, but I've found on numerous occasions there's 400 in the album from the same days and times, right? And maybe your story gets completed by looking at those rather than the ones that are on the profile. So word to the wise, follow the links and see if you can find the albums. Again, for permissions, we're not doing any cracking here, so if you run up against private profiles or you run up against sign-in pages for albums, photo albums, and that sort of stuff, you're done at that point. Your trail runs cold. You have to try another avenue. Regarding photo albums, the sites that host a lot of photos and videos, they vary as to whether they offer their content as albums or just as discrete links. So I've listed a few here that are common, and to give you a feel for how you may or may not be able to find an album based on the site that the photo's hosted on. It's a turbo talk. We're actually at 10:22, but if they'll let me, I can take a couple of questions. Yes?
It seems like a lot of your techniques are for manual spidering, somebody sitting in a browser. Have you experimented yet with automatic retrieval and storage of the web page?
Yeah, actually, there's on the question was, it sounds like this is all manual spidering. Actually, there's code included with the package on the CD, and that is automated spidering from whatever your source list of profiles is. Okay, so and that's I didn't save 950 megabytes of web pages with it. So yeah, there are automated tools there. Because the talk is so short, 20 minutes, I wanted to spend time more on the overview and the feel for, how would you approach this rather than going through the code or running an example. But good question. So don't forget the stuff on the CD in the back there.
Yeah, your very first slide said something about not downloading pictures to be safe, not downloading file or anything, and then the rest of the presentation talks about looking at pictures.
Yep.
But in the browser, you're downloading anyway,
If you're looking at a particular site, you're going to have to make your judgment call as to whether the content's a problem for you or not. I work with investigators a lot, and I usually tell them that they need to have a corporate policy or department policy around how they're going to deal with content that's problematic when they come across it. One of the reasons the tools don't store images is because if you're looking at the site, at least you can say, geez, I better clean off my machine and I better report to my supervisor that, I came across some stuff. But if you run a tool that's spidering automatically and you're hauling back hundreds of thousands of photos, you may not know that you're, entering the felony territory without realizing it. So that's why the automated tool doesn't go and store images. But you're still going to find as an investigator that photo content is an important aspect of investigating. So that's why I address it.
Is your tool, instead of saving those images, at least document file reading, exit properties, or anything else of interest about the image?
All that you would find is the link to it, the full HTML link to it that came down in the page that's hosting it. Any other questions? Thanks. Yeah.
What other tools or crawling applications can you look at
Well, being an open source kind of guy, I looked at wget and things of that nature, but it can't follow, it doesn't do an orderly job of following the structure of the site. So there is a MySpace Perl module that may be of interest. I poked at it a little bit, and I'd already done some development by the time I found that. I just stuck with straight low-tech Perl. Couple of advantages with that. It's not a whole lot of code. The sites do change, so you'll find that you do have to maintain it. And you'll find that having a smaller code base when you do have to change it, makes life easy. Certainly some people might say, well, geez, why didn't you use an HTML4, parser and blah, blah, blah. But particularly on sites where there's a lot of diversity in the HTML, just trying to get the parser to run is going to take you more time than just using the regular expressions to find the stuff you're looking for. So it was really mostly a matter of right tool for the right job, and keeping things light and fast. Yeah.
Given the hoorah in the news recently about people, mostly college students being denied employment because of compromising content, either pictures or text on their MySpace or whatever, do you think that the popularity of social networking is going to drop where this is significantly less viable than it's been?
Yeah, question, I'll see if I can trim that down a little bit. Because there can be personal impact to the content you put on your profile, like denial of a job or something like that, do I think that the sites will be less popular? I don't think so. I think what I'm seeing is with coverage like this, with coverage like Kevin Poulsen's work with the DOJ sex offender list, that instead of a reduction of popularity in the sites, is that people are availing themselves of the privacy options, right? Like we said at the outset, if somebody sets a profile to private, you're not going to see anything. So what I think is going to happen is people are going to get a little bit more reserved in their use of the sites, and more people will use the privacy options that are already on the sites to lock down their profiles. And that's going to make investigating harder on the one hand. On the other hand, people will be a little bit safer. That's a greater good. But I don't think these sites are not going away. I think that people will just be a little bit more circumspect in how they use them. Anybody else? Good. Thanks for coming. And, enjoy the rest of the conference.